For anybody that's ever heard me speak, I don't know what microphone's on, I guess it doesn't matter, but who's ever heard me speak, I always like to start out by saying that I have the honor of being the mayor of the greatest city in the world, Gaithersburg, Maryland. And it's truly never been truer than a day like today when we're joined by amazingly talented people who are here to celebrate this auspicious occasion of the 25th anniversary of Kentlands. I did want to mention that Mike Sesma, who's on the City Council of Gaithersburg, is here as well. He deserves a round of applause, please. And we're also pleased to welcome back to Gaithersburg Duany-Plater-Zyberk. We're sorry that Andres Duany was unable to join us because he was not feeling well, but obviously we hope he is feeling better, and we look forward to seeing Andres in a future occasion. But we take for granted how this community has matured over the years. I'm sure it's rewarding for Liz to return and witness how rolling acres of fields have been transformed into a nurturing community that is now embarking on its second generation. We know you've been back occasionally to see what you have shaped, and we thank you for returning once again for this quarter-century celebration. It's also worth mentioning that Duany-Plater-Zyberk has maintained an office and has had a constant presence in this community since the original charette 26 years ago. Kentlands is, at its very heart, the embodiment of collaboration. It took visionary planners, risk-taking developers, pioneering residents, and a flexible local government to make it a reality. I would like to acknowledge my good friend and then Mayor Ed Boher for his vision and his leadership. He had both the creativity and the fortitude to manage all of the stakeholders who participated in the trailblazing decisions that made this happen. I would also like to acknowledge the city's planning staff for their roles in the creation of this community. Kentlands could not have been built in Montgomery County or pretty much anywhere in the United States 25 years ago. In order to process the development plans, we had to create a new flexible mixed-use zone which allowed for nearly any use in the city, eliminated most setbacks and front yard requirements, and allowed for denser development while promoting communal open space. It was people like Jennifer Russell. She deserves a round of applause, please. Clark Wagner, somewhere, and Trudy Schwartz, along with the Planning Commission and the City Council, who helped make all of this possible. Most of all, we would like to acknowledge those who have chosen to make Kentlands their home. We often say it is the residents and business owners who breathe life into the bricks. Many of them are here today, and many have volunteered countless hours to coordinate this event and the 25 activities that make up the collective celebration of the 25th anniversary. Can we please have another round of applause for all of them, please? It now gives me a great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Duany-Plater-Zyberk. Liz is the founder of the Congress for the New Urbanism, which was established in 1993, the same year the New York Times characterized it as the most important phenomenon to emerge in American architecture in the post-Cold War era. Liz, who holds an undergraduate degree in architecture and urban planning from Princeton and master's in the architecture from Yale, is the co-author of two books, The New Civic Art and Suburban Nation, The Rise of Sprawl and the Decline of the American Dream. With her partner, Andres Duany, she has been awarded several honorary doctorates and awards, including the Brandeis Award for Architecture, the Thomas Jefferson Memorial Medal of Architecture from the University of Virginia, the Vincent J. Scully Prize for Exemplary Practice and Scholarship in Architecture and Urban Design from the National Building Museum, and the Seaside Prize for Contributions to Community Planning and Design from the Seaside Institute. Please join me in welcoming Liz.
The steps are at the back door. Good afternoon, everyone. This has been a wonderful event up to now, and I'm just so impressed by how well organized it is, how ambitious you are. 25 events in 25 months, and certainly this one that we're participating in is beautifully organized. Thank you. It is truly a shame that Andres is not here, not just to see himself on the Flute video, but I think he would have enjoyed the experiences that I've had with you all last night and already this morning. And I intend now to give you just a short introduction to what looks like from the symposium will be a wonderful series of stories, not only about Kentlands and how it came to be, but also how it looks, and those of us who have worked with it, how we look to the future. So we might imagine Andres to be here in spirit. So as you know, I was present at the outset of your community, part of the design team that worked with Joe Alfandre. And you know that design was initiated in a charette in the Arts Barn, that was called the Old Barn back then, presented in a tent, and chronicled by the New York Times. That was the easy part. Since then, you all have been the community builders of Kentlands. The heavy lifting, doing the heavy lifting of funding, building, and guiding the new community into its current immutable existence. Andres and our Kentlands office members are honored to be part of your celebrations. And so to kick off the series of remembrances and future perspectives that you will hear this afternoon. It's this one. All right. You wouldn't want me to start over, though. Is this working? Okay. So I thought I would start with a few of my own memories, which, as you might imagine, are sporadic because I've only come and gone from here over the years. But some of these you might not know, especially if you were not one of the original founders of the community. So to begin with, and he appeared on the film, we might remember David Wolf, the marketing expert who introduced us to Joe Alfandre. And during the charette, David gave us a very informative presentation about the different life stages of home buyers, with special focus on seniors. I remember there were long discussions about what they should be called. Were they the elderly? Were they seniors, retired, empty nesters, and so on? I'm not sure we arrived at a good name, but now, 25 years later, it turns out I am one of them. So I was asking a lot of questions about your seniors' apartments as we were walking around the community this morning. Juliana Walker McDowell, who was there last night, I'm not sure if she's here now, represented the Kent family at the charette. She cheered us on at the charette and in months and years afterwards to preserve the sensitive landscape and to make the places beautiful. Mayor Ed Boher promised to champion and watchdog the project after Joe Alfandre gave him the keys to the mansion in the final charette. He turned around and said he was going to make sure that it was as good as we were drawing it to be. The night after the charette, lightning struck the large old farm oak tree that had been a focal point of our renderings. You know, when you do a charette, there's only so much time to do the drawings, and we focused one of the precious few drawings we could get done on this fabulous oak tree, which then, of course, disappeared. The charette renderings, which I'm sure you'll see a number in other people's presentations today, and certainly they're up in the show in the back, were the first sense of place illustrations by Charles Barrett. Some of us have been thinking a lot about Charles because he had a unique and extreme talent. Those drawings charmed and persuaded government officials, investors, and buyers. And without them, probably we would not have gone as far. Charles's vignettes of future places were emulated in many subsequent projects and played an important role in the promotion of new urban principles for decades to come. I think many of us remember those as a very powerful tool, a kind of propaganda tool. And he had a wonderful sense of design in which In fact, very often he would start renderings that then we would design to because they were so wonderfully imaginative of placemaking. Mike Watkins was a recent architecture school graduate. We left him behind after the charrette to live and work in Kentlands. With little experience and little guidance from us, he literally invented the role of the town architect, since emulated by many new urban developments far and wide. Over many years, Mike cajoled and pummeled all who tried to diminish quality. And so you have a great debt to Mike. Alex Krieger, who will be speaking after me, took his charrette experience back to Harvard, eventually producing an exhibit and a book. It was called Towns and Town-Making Principles in 1991, that indeed encouraged the spread of ideas about community design that were being drawn up here in Kentlands. I think you all know that Joe Alfandre paid for the school portico. I remember the figure $350,000, which 25 years ago, it sounds like a lot of money today, but that was a lot of money then. After long discussions with the school district and the hard-fought agreement to reorient its entrance to face Kentlands rather than Darnestown Road, you are indeed one of the few communities in the country where children and teachers walk to school. Some years later, I visited Kentlands for the Christmas party. It was occurring in Robert Orr's designed new community recreational center. It had just opened. In the course of the evening, I met a new resident, a retired man who had moved from Brooklyn to suburban Washington to be closer to his daughter, describing to me, not knowing my role on the design team, how he had visited many subdivisions looking for a place to live, and this was the only one that looked like it would be walking friendly. This was indeed a satisfying moment of confirmation. At some point, I couldn't remember when, we met Diane Dorney, resident, activist, and developer of the town paper, whose work spread beyond Kentlands to announce and communicate for many projects that have become Kentlands' offspring throughout the United States. And I think you know that Diane also had to be at a family wedding and couldn't be with us this weekend. A decade into Kentlands' life, what an encouraging surprise it was to hear Mayor Boher insist that the National Geographic property be developed in concert with Kentlands, now known as Lakelands. In the 1990s, in a briefly published magazine started by a young urbanist, regrettably I've lost track of him, the editor wrote an article about new communities. He went up and down the East Coast to visit new urban communities. And in this case, he told the story of a teenager and his friends living in Kentlands who claimed that this was their preferred weekend gathering place. They spoke not only of their freedom of movement and variety of possible activities, but they liked knowing that they were being monitored. That was their phrases. And this became very important, likewise, support for our ideas, because when we began to work with existing communities, one of the things we heard most from residents and especially parents was that there was nothing for teenagers to do. There's no place for teenagers to go. And of course in Miami, they all hang out at the shopping centers, and getting there by car is extremely dangerous. So understanding that we had made a place for young people to be comfortable in was really, I think, gave us a lot of impetus for future work after Kentlands. And what a great exemplar also of new urbanism is the Greek restaurant Vasilis, with its owner family living upstairs. Nothing was easy. Permitting the restaurant was a long story, among others. And speaking of nothing being easy, 10 different plans for the 40-acre commercial corner, a sequential case study of various inventive ways to transform conventional mall design, which is what it was slated for originally. This aspect of your history deserves a book. Probably many other things do too. Also long-term, the charette idea of a trolley to connect to the Shady Grove train station. An idea derided at the time, and now, only 25 years later, it might become a reality. So now, among its other roles, Kentlands serves as a jumping-off point for transforming the Arabian Peninsula. Yes, DPZ's office here, Marina, Mike, Andrew, and Carolyn, is leading our work in the Middle East, bringing smart growth and new urbanism to another part of the globe. So DPZ has enjoyed being part of Kentlands for a quarter of a century. Your community has been a hospitable home for our office and its staff, and you have welcomed countless visitors from around the world who have come to learn from your collective efforts of community building. Your shared efforts, your beautiful houses, the open space you maintain, the front yard gardens, I must say I'm completely charmed by those, shops, and other businesses set an example for all who seek a better way to live together. For that example, Andres and I and all of our firm congratulate you and thank you. So our next speaker is Alex Krieger, professor at the Graduate School of Design at Harvard University, an urban designer and practitioner with the firm Chan Krieger, or is it Krieger Chan? I'm sorry, I don't track that. Alex was part of the original team, as are many other people in the room. He has crisscrossed the world, both in practice, helping cities across the United States, perhaps he might mention some of them, as well as with students, bringing ideas of architecture and urban design, not only from his own practical experience, hopefully some from Kentlands, throughout the country and the world. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you very much, Liz. I'm extremely appreciative to be here and very honored to have been invited by Liz and Andres. Some of you in the room may not know this, some certainly do. I'm not always invited in all new urbanist convocations because I've actually written a lot of criticism about new urbanism over the years. Now, never about the ideas, at least I like to think always respective criticism, really about the ideas, sometimes about the hype, and sometimes about some of the things that new urbanism, at least in its initial years, did not address as well, the inner city or environmental issues and so forth. So I'm very pleased to be here, and I'm kind of overwhelmed actually by how wonderful the place has become. I last was here about 8 years ago with a group of graduate students, but we only had a very brief tour and we didn't see many of the residential areas. Now the charette actually was very influential in my life and in my career, although some people who think that I only criticize new urbanism tend to not believe that. First of all, I was married 3 months after the charette. My wife is shy, sitting in the back of the room. That was so, therefore the charette and my marriage are always in my mind at the same time. And as you are celebrating the 25th anniversary of Kentlands, we're celebrating the 25th year of our daughter's birth. Yeah, right? And very significantly, I shifted my allegiance at Harvard from being part of the Department of Architecture to part of the Department of Urban Design and Planning. A very important shift in my career, partially as a result of the charette and understanding the future of American society was much more important related to urban planning and urban design than just simply the design of buildings. So I moved up to the 3rd floor in our building and have been there ever since. And in that context, I was able to, a year or two later, as Liz mentioned, invite Liz and Andres to the Graduate School of Design to offer a studio, which they did, to offer a series of lectures and also to mount quite a major exhibition, which was a bit shocking at the time, especially in the halls of Gunn Hall, where the design school is at Harvard. And out of that came this book, which Liz and Andreas mentioned. It'll always be the first publication about their work, even though mountains have been written since that time. But this is still first. I'd like to read you just a very short snippet from it. And remember, this was published in 1991, very shortly after the beginnings of Kentlands. So, behaving like ostriches, many architects and town planners prefer to ignore the suburb, hoping somehow that the suburb will prove as inconsequential as it is distasteful to most architects. Most of us, after all, see ourselves as urbanists, lovers of cities where culture and civic space interact naturally. And because we believe this, we assume that the city and city values are ubiquitous, while the suburbs are some aberrant form of development. Andreas Duany and Duany-Plater-Zyberk have lifted their heads to survey the cul-de-sacs and have discovered what is so hard for us to admit, that the suburb, not the city, is ubiquitous in American life. And they reason that unless we confront the suburb directly, to understand both its hold on the American imagination and its liabilities, the liabilities will overwhelm us. And that was the great insight, actually, that Liz and Andreas and a number of their colleagues had 25, 30 years ago, and they were right. And so ever since then, the liabilities of the suburb have begun to be overwhelmed, if you will, by, of course, the good thinking that was produced early on, and since then, at charettes such as at Kentlands, and, of course, the realization of the town itself. I haven't mentioned this before to Liz, Anne and I, my wife and I, were retained to write a guidebook on city design for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts shortly after the charrette. And of course, a lot of the charrette influenced that guidebook. It's called the Design Primer, and was distributed to 365 communities all over Massachusetts to try to have those cities think about what is worthy of being preserved and how they should advance into the future. So the charrette actually was very, very significant in our lives, not just in your lives, certainly in my life. Now, 25 years is in the history of a city, whether it's Boston or DC or Rome, is just a blink in the eye. But 25 years, as I think many of you know, is also a long time. And a lot has happened in those 25 years, much of it attributable to what began to occur here. For example, at the moment, there's an enormous interest in cities, just not in the United States, but around the world. Enormous interest in cities, urbanization, the fact that they're still growing so large, and how they have to become much more responsive to, well, you take your pick, poverty, environment, sea level rise, and so forth, and how they should become just more equitable and decent places for humanity to live, as more and more of humanity actually now inhabits cities around the planet. And so there are now lots of conferences around the world about cities. I just returned from one. It was in Dallas, but don't poke fun at that. The year before, it was in Paris. By a new organization called New Cities Foundation, and there are many such organizations. And 500 people were there to talk about cities, partially actually as a result of the work of the new urbanists and places like Kentlands. But it was also a little bit disappointing, because a lot of the discussion was about so-called smart cities rather than good cities. A lot of the discussion was about networks and apps and services, not about the quality of life that cities are actually ultimately to be about. So I will end this with quoting Aristotle, if you don't mind. I wish somebody had quoted him in Dallas a couple of days ago to the 500 participants of this particular convocation. 2,000 years ago, he said an amazing thing that applies, I think, directly to Kentlands. He said, people first came to cities for security, which strikes us a little bit odd in the post 9/11 era, but of course absolutely was true. You were safer within the walls of the city against all those who you were unknown about outside of the walls. And he said, people stayed in the city for economic benefit, And that is certainly true as well. And that's why several hundred million people are moving to cities in China, for example. But he said, but they will ultimately remain in cities for the good life. They will ultimately remain in cities for the good life. And I think that's very appropriate because Kentlands is proved to be not about process or services, but about experiencing a good life. So congratulations to all of you.